The silent passenger. Summary. Claire is on a late-night subway ride, nearly empty, when a mysterious figure enters her car. As the train moves through the tunnels, Claire realizes that something is terribly wrong with the passenger who never moves, never speaks, but seems to be getting closer. Claire's commute home was always quiet, but tonight, the silence felt oppressive. It was nearly midnight, and the subway car was nearly empty, save for an old man sleeping in the corner. As the train pulled into the next station, Claire noticed a figure standing on the platform. A tall, thin man in a long coat, his face hidden under the brim of a hat. He boarded the car and sat across from her, but never looked up. The train began to move, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The man sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, his head slightly tilted forward as if he were asleep. But Claire could see his eyes. They were open, staring straight ahead. She tried to focus on her book, but every time she glanced up, the man seemed to be sitting closer. With each passing station, the man inched closer, though Claire never saw him move. Panic began to rise in her chest. She glanced at the old man in the corner, but he was still asleep, oblivious to her growing terror. The train entered a long, dark tunnel, and the lights flickered. When they came back on, the man was sitting directly next to her. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the cold radiating from him, and when she looked at his face, she saw nothing but darkness beneath the brim of his hat. Without warning, the train screeched to a halt in the middle of the tunnel. The lights went out completely, plunging the car into total darkness. In the pitch black, Claire felt something cold and clammy touch her hand. She yanked it away, her heart pounding in her ears. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, but the man was gone. The subway car was completely empty, except for Claire and the sleeping old man, who still hadn't stirred. As the train slowly began to move again, Claire's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from an unknown number. "I'm still here. The forgotten door." Summary. While cleaning out the basement of her new home, Emily discovers a door she's never noticed before. It's small, almost hidden behind old boxes, and when she opens it, she finds a narrow stairway leading down into darkness. What she finds at the bottom is something that should have remained forgotten. Emily had lived in the old house for a year, but the basement still felt like uncharted territory. Boxes from the move were still stacked high, and the air was thick with dust. She decided it was finally time to organize the space, so she spent the afternoon sorting through boxes, discarding items she no longer needed. As she moved a particularly heavy box, Emily noticed something unusual. A small door, almost hidden behind the stack. It was old, with peeling paint and a rusted handle, and she could have sworn it wasn't there before. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pulled the door open, revealing a narrow stairway descending into darkness. Emily hesitated, but something compelled her to explore. She grabbed a flashlight and carefully made her way down the steps, each one creaking under her weight. The air grew colder the deeper she went, and the walls seemed to close in around her. At the bottom, she found herself in a small, dimly lit room with stone walls. In the center of the room was an old wooden chest, covered in dust and cobwebs. Her heart pounded as she approached the chest. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusted. With a bit of effort, Emily managed to pry it open. Inside, she found a collection of old photographs, yellowed with age. They were of children, their faces blank and lifeless, as if the life had been drained from them. But what made her blood run cold was the fact that each photograph had a name written on the back. Names of children who had gone missing over the past century. Before Emily could process what she had found, she heard a soft whispering behind her. She spun around, shining her flashlight in every direction, but saw nothing. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and she felt a cold hand grip her shoulder. Emily screamed and dropped the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. She ran up the stairs, not daring to look back, and slammed the door shut behind her. But the whispering didn't stop. It followed her through the basement, up the stairs, and into the safety of her living room. That night, as she tried to sleep, the whispering continued, growing louder and more desperate. The next morning, Emily tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, but when she went back to the basement, the door was gone. The wall where it had been was smooth and unbroken, as if the door had never existed. But the whispering never stopped. It followed her wherever she went, a constant reminder of the forgotten children who were still waiting to be found. The empty playground. Summary: a new family moves into a quiet neighborhood, and their young daughter, Lily, becomes obsessed with the playground down the street. But when Lily starts talking about her new friend, who only appears when the playground is empty, her parents realize something is terribly wrong. The house at the end of Maple Street had been empty for years, but when the Johnson family moved in, the neighborhood felt alive again. The quiet street was lined with old trees, and at the end of the block was a small playground. Lily, the Johnsons' 6-year-old daughter, was immediately drawn to it. Every day after school, Lily would beg her parents to take her to the playground. At first, they were happy to oblige. It was a safe neighborhood, and the playground was always empty, as if it were waiting just for her. But soon, Lily started talking about a new friend she had made. "Her name is Mary," Lily would say. "She's really nice, but she only comes out when the playground is empty." At first, her parents didn't think much of it. After all, imaginary friends were normal for children her age. But as time went on, they noticed changes in Lily. She became withdrawn, spending more and more time at the playground, even when it was getting dark. She would come home with dirt under her nails and strange bruises on her arms. One evening, Mrs. Johnson decided to follow Lily to the playground. She hid behind a tree and watched as her daughter played on the swings, talking and laughing as if someone were pushing her. But the playground was empty. There was no one there but Lily. When Mrs. Johnson confronted her daughter, Lily became hysterical, insisting that Mary was real and that she was just hiding because she didn't like adults. That night, Lily had a terrible nightmare, screaming and thrashing in her sleep. When her parents rushed to her room, they found her bed covered in dirt, and Lily's nails were broken and bloody. Desperate, the Johnsons did some research on the house and the playground. What they discovered chilled them to the bone. Years ago, a little girl named Mary had gone missing from the neighborhood. Her body was never found, but rumors circulated that she had been playing at the playground the night she disappeared. Terrified, the Johnsons decided to move, but on the night before they were set to leave, Lily disappeared. They found her the next morning, sitting on the swing at the playground, her clothes dirty and her eyes vacant. When they asked her what happened, all she could say was, "Mary wanted to show me where she's hiding." The Johnsons moved away that same day, but Lily was never the same. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was always about Mary. They never returned to Maple Street, but every now and then, Mrs. Johnson would hear her daughter whispering to someone in the dark, "I'll see you at the playground." The shadows in the wall. Summary: after moving into an old apartment, Daniel starts noticing strange shadows on the walls. They move on their own, shifting and dancing even when the lights are off. As the shadows become more aggressive, Daniel realizes they are not just tricks of the light. They are something far more sinister. Daniel had always loved the charm of old buildings, so when he found an apartment in a century-old building downtown, he jumped at the opportunity. The place had high ceilings, original wood floors, and a cozy atmosphere that made him feel at home immediately. But it didn't take long for Daniel to notice something strange. The first night, as he was unpacking, he noticed a shadow on the wall that didn't seem to belong to anything in the room. It was faint, just a small blur in the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look at it directly, it was gone. He brushed it off as his imagination, but over the next few days, the shadows became more frequent. They moved on their own, shifting and dancing even when the lights were off. At first, Daniel tried to ignore them, convincing himself it was just the light playing tricks on him. But soon, the shadows began to take on shapes, vague, human-like figures that seemed to watch him from the corners of the room. One night, Daniel woke up to find the room completely dark, even though he always left a light on. The shadows on the walls were moving, swirling around him like a black mist. He felt a cold hand brush against his face, and when he reached out to turn on the light, he found himself unable to move. Paralyzed with fear, Daniel watched as the shadows closed in on him, their forms becoming more defined. He could see faces now, twisted, tormented expressions that seemed to be crying out in agony. The air grew thick, and Daniel felt as if he were suffocating. With a burst of strength, he managed to reach the lamp on his bedside table and switch it on. The room flooded with light, and the shadows disappeared. But the sense of dread lingered. He knew they would be back. The next day, Daniel contacted the building manager, who told him the apartment had a history. The previous tenant had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and there were rumors that the building was haunted. Desperate to escape, Daniel packed his things and left that same day. But the shadows didn't stay behind. Wherever Daniel went, they followed, faint at first, but growing stronger with each passing night. No matter how bright the light, the shadows were always there, waiting in the corners, just out of sight. And every night they came closer,